What if I told you Ford once built a nuclear-powered car or a two-wheeled vehicle that balanced itself like a sci-fi bike? Forget the Mustang and F-150, these are the strangest machines Ford ever dreamed up. Hit like and subscribe as we count down the 25 weirdest cars Ford ever made. Number 1. 1953 Ford X100. The Ford X100 wasn't just a concept. It was a glimpse into a world where your car was smarter, flashier, and maybe even more indulgent than your home. Unveiled in 1953, this radical machine was Ford's first full-fledged dream car, and unlike many wild designs of the era, the X100 was not just for show. It actually worked, and more importantly, it worked in weird ways. The X100 was loaded with over 50 groundbreaking and bizarre features that pushed the limits of what people imagined cars could be. It had dual radio telephones, a dictaphone, an automatic fuel filler cap, and even a built-in electric shaver tucked into the dashboard, because apparently, shaving at 60 miles per hour was the future. The driver's seat had individually adjustable heating, the rear passengers had their own air vents and audio controls, and the car's headlights swiveled with the steering wheel to illuminate curves before you turned into them. In essence, the X100 was an experimental testbed, but with all the style of a sci-fi cruiser. Visually, the car screamed jet-age drama. Its low-slung body glided on wide white walls beneath massive, swept-back tail fins. The windshield wrapped dramatically around the front, offering an uninterrupted panoramic view that felt more airplane cockpit than automobile. Chrome trim danced along every contour, framing a sculpted body that seemed aerodynamic even when parked. Under the hood, the X100 boasted a 300-horsepower Lincoln V8 engine paired with a special automatic transmission, because form without function wasn't enough for Ford's engineers. The car's body panels were crafted from stainless steel, aluminum, and fiberglass, making it as much a metallurgy experiment as a design one. Perhaps what makes the X100 so weird isn't just its gadgets or its striking looks. It's that it took the ordinary act of driving and reimagined it as a personalized, automated, and indulgent experience, an approach more familiar to 21st century tech companies than to car makers in the 50s. In the world of bizarre Ford creations, the X100 set the tone: go big, get strange, and build the future today. Number 2. 1954 Ford FX Atmos. If there was ever a car that looked like it crash-landed from an episode of Flash Gordon, it was the Ford FX Atmos. Unveiled in 1954, the FX Atmos wasn't just a car, it was Ford's loudest, most unrestrained statement that the future belonged to science fiction. This jet-inspired concept looked less like a mode of transportation and more like a personal spacecraft repurposed for suburban Earth. Its most dramatic feature was the twin-bubble canopies, one for the driver and a second for the passenger. These transparent domes gave the car a fighter jet appearance, shielding its occupants while hinting at a world where driving felt like piloting. Sitting low to the ground, the car's sleek body was flanked by massive, sharply canted tail fins that jutted upward like stabilizers on a missile. These fins weren't just cosmetic, they reinforced the theme of controlled flight and space-age progress. The nose of the FX Atmos featured a central radar pod, theoretically meant for traffic navigation, with blade-like antennae protruding forward. At a time when highways were still evolving, Ford envisioned a world where cars communicated wirelessly with guidance systems to avoid accidents and congestion. The FX Atmos imagined such a system decades before GPS was even a prototype. There was no engine under the hood, because the concept wasn't engineered to drive. But that didn't stop Ford from claiming that future versions might be powered by an atomic generator. Yes, atomic. The idea was that tiny nuclear capsules could power the car for thousands of miles without refueling, a vision pulled straight from the atomic optimism of post-war America. Inside, the FX Atmos was just as wild. The driver was positioned in the center, flanked by passenger seats offset behind, like a cockpit. Controls were streamlined, with toggles and push buttons replacing traditional knobs. Rear-view mirrors were ditched in favor of television screens that displayed footage from rear-mounted cameras, a feature far ahead of its time. The FX Atmos wasn't about practicality. It was an art piece, a provocation, and a neon-colored dream about what the future could look like if science had no budget and no rules. Among all of Ford's concept cars, this one might be the purest embodiment of 50s futurism, a strange, beautiful fantasy that never made it past the show floor. Number 3. 1955 Ford Mistair. The 1955 Ford Mistair looked like something you'd expect to find parked on the moon. With its smooth, rounded body lines, dramatic rear tail fins, and a seamless bubble canopy in place of a roof, the Mistair was Ford's bold foray into a world of space-age luxury. Unlike many other concepts of the era that emphasized engine innovation or aerodynamic performance, the Mistair focused on style, comfort, and speculative technology that bordered on the surreal. One of the Mistair's most outlandish features was its enormous clear canopy that tilted upward on a hinge to allow access to the cabin. There were no doors in the traditional sense, just that single canopy lifting to reveal a futuristic lounge inside. Once open, the front seat swiveled outward automatically, allowing passengers to enter and exit with ease and theatrical flair. It was as much about the show as it was about the function, and that was exactly Ford's point. Inside, the Mistair was designed to offer a completely new type of driving experience. The steering wheel was replaced with a throw-over stick controller, a single yoke that could be positioned in front of either the driver or the front passenger. The idea was to make driving feel more like piloting an aircraft, which matched the car's overall aesthetic. Adding to the futuristic feel was a console equipped with a telephone and a built-in television screen, which were nothing short of science fiction for the 1950s. Although the Mistair didn't have a functioning drivetrain, Ford claimed it was designed to house a compact gas turbine engine mounted in the rear. Gas turbine technology was being tested by a few manufacturers at the time, and Ford's inclusion of the idea, even in a non-functional form, showed its commitment to pushing the technological envelope. Ultimately, the Mistair was a stylistic fantasy brought to life in fiberglass and chrome. It was a car that embodied the optimism of the jet age, where engineers and designers dreamed not just of better vehicles, but of a whole new kind of futuristic lifestyle. With its gliding lines, aircraft inspiration, and dreamlike details, the Mistair remains one of the strangest and most visually striking concept cars Ford ever dared to build. Number 4. 1955 Ford Latco. In 1955, Ford introduced a concept so strange and so ahead of its time that even today, it feels more like something from a sci-fi toy catalog than from a Detroit design studio. Named the Ford Latco, this radical creation wasn't just about imagining what cars would look like in the future. It was about imagining how they would be operated. Built at only 3/8 the scale of a real car, the Latco was a fully functional, remote-controlled vehicle, guided by radio signals and steered by a driver standing off to the side with a controller in hand. Yes, in the mid-1950s, Ford engineers were essentially playing with a life-sized RC car. Designed by the legendary Alex Tremulous, who was also behind the Tucker 48 and the Ford Gyron, the Latco was a visual explosion of space-age design. The body featured exaggerated, canted tail fins that leaned inward, giving the car a sense of compressed motion and vertical energy. A canopy-like bubble roof dominated the cabin, reminiscent of fighter jets or lunar landing craft. The front fascia carried hidden, retractable headlights that could disappear entirely into the body, a sleek and stealthy touch that felt decades ahead. Unlike most concepts of the time that were either static models or hand-push showpieces, the Latco could actually drive itself, sort of. It was equipped with a small gas engine and remote control hardware, meaning engineers could maneuver it across test areas without a person inside. While it wasn't scaled for passengers, this moving prototype was used to test proportions, visibility angles, and futuristic controls that might one day trickle down to full-scale production vehicles. Its name, Latco, was borrowed from Puccini's opera, a nod to elegance and theatrical drama. And drama it had. Whether in motion or parked under a spotlight, the Latco was like nothing else, blending automotive engineering, remote technology, and aerospace styling into one surreal machine. In the pantheon of weird Ford creations, Latco earns its place not just for how it looked, but for how it moved, without anyone behind the wheel. Number 5. 1958 Ford Nucleon. In the height of the atomic age, when nuclear energy was hailed as the solution to nearly everything, Ford dared to take that optimism to the road. Enter the Ford Nucleon, a 1958 concept car so audacious and bizarre that it seemed ripped from the pages of a pulp science fiction magazine. The Nucleon's central claim to fame was its proposed power source, a self-contained nuclear reactor mounted in the rear of the vehicle. That's right, no gasoline, no diesel, not even electricity in the conventional sense. Ford envisioned a future where cars would run on miniature atomic reactors, using uranium to power the vehicle for up to 5,000 miles before needing a new core. The whole idea leaned heavily into the post-war dream that nuclear energy would make everything, from cities to vacuum cleaners, better, cleaner, and virtually limitless. Because of the imaginary nature of its engine, the design of the Nucleon broke every rule. With no need for a traditional internal combustion engine up front, the passenger cabin was pushed dramatically forward, almost over the front axle. This gave the car an unusual cab-forward stance that looked unstable and alien, as though it was permanently leaning into a launch sequence. At the back, a massive, sealed compartment housed the hypothetical reactor, flanked by upright cooling towers that resembled spacecraft thrusters more than automotive components. Only a 3/8 scale model of the Nucleon was ever built, understandably, given the massive technical and safety challenges of putting a nuclear reactor into a consumer vehicle. But the fact that Ford engineers and designers even speculated about it, and then gave it a physical form, says everything about the mindset of the era. The Nucleon wasn't about feasibility. It was about imagining a world where energy was limitless, refueling was obsolete, and cars became sleek, radioactive marvels. Today, it stands not as a practical prototype, but as one of the strangest and most striking artifacts of mid-century futurism. In Ford's long catalog of wild ideas, nothing quite captures weird ambition like the rolling nuclear fantasy that was the Nucleon. Number 6. 1958 Ford X2000. In 1958, while the real world still wrestled with chrome, fins, and carburetors, Ford's designers took a wild leap into fantasy and asked a bold question: what would cars look like in the year 2000? Their answer was the Ford X2000, a car that embodied everything outrageous, flamboyant, and wildly speculative about the era's concept design language. Although it was never intended to drive and only existed as a 3/8 scale model, the X2000 became an instant icon of overstyled futurism. At first glance, the X2000 looks like it belongs more in a toy aisle than on a road. Its proportions are exaggerated and cartoonish, with an elongated snout, exaggerated contours, and a front grille shaped like an oversized oval horse collar. That design cue would later reappear in the ill-fated Edsel, but on the X2000 it was stretched and distorted to the extreme, dominating the entire front fascia. Above it, a massive clear bubble windshield swept across the front like a fighter jet canopy, offering near-total visibility and total lack of restraint. The rear was no less theatrical. Rocket-style tail fins soared upward at impossible angles, flanking dual bullet-shaped taillights that looked more like thrusters than illumination devices. The entire silhouette suggested motion and propulsion, as if the car wasn't meant to drive on highways, but rather to launch from runways. There were no door handles, no bumpers, no nods to practicality, just chrome-drenched fantasy on wheels. The X2000 wasn't based on any known platform and had no engine or mechanical plans. It was a pure styling exercise, but it told the public a great deal about what Ford's designers were dreaming. In a time when the future seemed boundless and technology promised to reshape every aspect of life, the X2000 imagined a tomorrow filled with speed, glamour, and absurd elegance. Though never built full-size, its legacy survives as one of the most visually unhinged creations Ford ever dared to reveal. The X2000 was not a car. It was an automotive hallucination, drenched in chrome and launched from the imagination of a studio unburdened by reality. Number 7. 1959 Ford Levikar Mach 1. In 1959, Ford took a giant leap into speculative transportation with the unveiling of the Levikar Mach 1, a vehicle that didn't just defy expectations, it defied gravity. This bizarre one-seat experimental pod wasn't designed to roll on tires or cruise on rails. Instead, it was built to hover several inches above the ground, riding on a cushion of high-pressure air like a personal ground effect vehicle. Shaped like a streamlined torpedo with a teardrop profile and covered canopy, the Levikar Mach 1 looked more like a science fiction hovercraft than anything resembling a traditional car. It was compact, low to the ground, and entirely wheelless. The entire underbody was engineered with a specialized air distribution system that channeled pressurized jets downward to lift the vehicle into a hover state. The technology behind it was similar to what powered air hockey tables or military hovercrafts, except Ford was dreaming of applying it to personal transportation. The Levikar Mach 1 was not a full-scale consumer-ready prototype. It was more of a proof of concept, testing the feasibility of airlift propulsion and maneuverability in a lightweight shell. Ford engineers believed this technology could evolve into a high-speed commuter vehicle, one that would float over specially built roads with minimal friction. It even had a magnetic stabilization system in the works, aiming to control drift and steering in the absence of wheels. From a design standpoint, the Levikar was like a UFO mated with a jet ski. Its fully enclosed cockpit had a bubble dome, and the control layout mimicked aircraft-style yokes rather than steering wheels. It was the type of machine you'd expect George Jetson to park in his space condo's garage. Though it never evolved into a practical transportation method, the Levikar Mach 1 remains one of the strangest vehicles Ford ever built. It was an honest attempt to rethink mobility from the ground up, or rather, just above it. In an era obsessed with the future, Ford dared to ask, why have roads at all? And for a brief moment, they hovered toward an answer. Number 8. 1959 Ford Anglia 105e. When Ford of Britain released the Anglia 105e in 1959, it didn't just update an aging model, it delivered one of the strangest and most polarizing compact car designs ever to reach mass production. While most automakers were still dabbling in American-style flourishes like chrome and modest fins, the Anglia 105e took those ideas and turned them on their heads, literally. The most striking design element was its reverse-slanted rear window, a feature so bizarre that even today, it continues to puzzle and fascinate enthusiasts. The idea behind the backward-leaning glass wasn't just aesthetic flair. Ford engineers claimed it helped reduce rain buildup on the window, as water would run off more easily without a wiper. It also allowed more headroom for rear passengers and kept sunlight from baking the interior, though whether these benefits outweighed the visual strangeness is still up for debate. The backward glass wasn't alone in its oddity. The Anglia 105e also sported small but sharp tail fins that jutted upward from the rear fenders, giving the compact car a vaguely jet-age silhouette. From the front, the car had a bug-eyed stare with wide-set headlamps and a toothy chrome grille. The overall proportions were angular and upright, making the car look almost like it was drawn by a comic book artist rather than an automotive designer. Yet, despite the unconventional look, the Anglia was an engineering success. It introduced a new overhead valve engine and a slick 4-speed gearbox, bringing reliability and efficiency to budget-conscious buyers in post-war Britain. It may have looked like a toy, but it drove like a real car, and people bought it. Over 1 million units were eventually sold, making it a commercial triumph in spite of its aesthetic weirdness. And decades later, its legacy would take a magical turn when a flying version appeared in the Harry Potter films, cementing its reputation as a car of quirks and curiosity. The Ford Anglia 105e wasn't flashy or fast, but its backward thinking, literally and figuratively, earned it a permanent place in the pantheon of weird automotive design. Number 9. 1961 Ford Gyron. In 1961, when most cars were still firmly grounded on 4 wheels, Ford presented the Gyron, a vehicle that completely reimagined how balance, motion, and design could coexist in the automotive world. This extraordinary concept car had just 2 wheels, one in the front and one in the back, aligned like a motorcycle, yet the body was a fully enclosed, jet-inspired cocoon. It didn't rely on conventional stability mechanisms. Instead, the Gyron used gyroscopes, high-speed spinning devices housed inside the car to maintain balance while in motion. Created by famed designer Alex Tremulous, who had a background in both aeronautics and advanced automotive design, the Gyron was a collaboration between fantasy and theoretical engineering. The design was later refined by none other than Sid Mead, the futurist visual artist behind Blade Runner and Tron. The result was a sleek, tear-shaped vehicle that looked more like a science fiction spaceship than anything you'd see on the road. When stationary, the Gyron deployed two outrigger legs that extended from the sides to prevent it from tipping over. These stabilizers would retract automatically once the car gained speed and the internal gyroscopes took over. The idea wasn't just to save space by ditching two wheels. It was to explore a completely new paradigm of vehicle dynamics. In theory, the car could corner with unmatched stability and lower rolling resistance, making it both efficient and futuristic. Visually, the Gyron was a masterclass in forward-looking design. It featured a low-slung fuselage with a dome glass canopy, sharply tapered body lines, and no visible wheels from the side profile. The seating was tandem, much like a jet cockpit, reinforcing the aviation theme. There was no steering wheel in the traditional sense, just a pair of aircraft-style controls that reinforced the sense that this was not a car, but a machine from a more advanced civilization. The Gyron never made it past the concept stage, and tragically, the original prototype was destroyed in a fire in 1962. Yet, its legacy lives on as one of the boldest and strangest experiments Ford ever conceived. Balancing not only on two wheels, but on the edge of science fiction and reality, the Gyron still stands as a symbol of what can happen when engineers are allowed to imagine without limits. Number 10. 1961 Ford Unatron. In the rapidly modernizing world of the early 1960s, Ford proposed one of its most unusual and least remembered futuristic concepts, the Ford Unatron. Unlike the jet-inspired speedsters and space-age coupes of the era, the Unatron was never meant to thrill with velocity or dazzle with chrome. Instead, it reimagined the very purpose of the automobile by combining mobility with productivity. Essentially, the Unatron was envisioned as a fully functional mobile office, decades before remote work or digital nomads became part of the cultural lexicon. The Unatron never left the drawing board, but the idea behind it was as radical as any physical concept Ford ever produced. Its exterior was styled to resemble a sleek, low-slung minibus or mobile studio, more form-following function than attention-seeking sculpture. The body was wide and smooth, with minimal ornamentation, and large windows allowed natural light to flood what Ford imagined as a workplace on wheels. Inside, the Unatron was to be outfitted with desks, communication equipment, and integrated storage compartments, allowing professionals to work while en route to meetings or while parked at job sites. One could imagine architects drafting blueprints, executives making calls on car phones, or engineers analyzing data, all from inside the vehicle itself. In a world still dominated by stationary typewriters and rotary phones, this was a leap of imagination. Ford even floated the possibility of the Unatron being used for mobile broadcasting or scientific research, adapting the cabin layout depending on the mission. As an early vision of modular vehicle design, it was ahead of its time. While RVs existed in the 1960s, none had the professional, commercial focus Ford envisioned here. What makes the Unatron especially strange is that it wasn't performance-driven or luxury-obsessed, it was work-driven. It imagined a world where people would take their work with them, not just in briefcases, but embedded into the vehicle itself. Though it never made it to prototype form, the Unatron hinted at the rise of mobile connectivity, laptop culture, and the blending of life and transport, ideas that, in hindsight, weren't weird at all but prophetic. Number 11. 1962 Ford Seattleite 21. When Ford unveiled the Seattleite 21 at the Century 21 Exposition in Seattle in 1962, it wasn't just showcasing a car, it was presenting a bold, bizarre, and wildly optimistic vision of personal transportation in the 21st century. This 3/8 scale concept model wasn't designed for the roads of the day, but for the imagined highways of tomorrow, where technology and modular design would supposedly redefine the automobile. The most immediately jarring aspect of the Seattleite 21 was its six-wheel configuration. It had 4 small steerable wheels up front and 2 large drive wheels in the rear, giving it an unorthodox stance that made it look part lunar rover, part luxury pod. The extended front axle was meant to improve handling and stability at high speeds, at a time when automakers were beginning to dream of cars that could cruise comfortably at over 100 miles per hour. But the real weirdness came from what Ford proposed beneath the surface. The Seattleite 21 was imagined with interchangeable power modules, including gas turbines, fuel cells, and even a compact nuclear reactor. Yes, a mini reactor powering your personal car. The front and rear body modules could also be swapped, allowing drivers to convert the car from a city runabout into a long-range touring sedan or even a futuristic delivery vehicle. Inside, Ford envisioned an interior filled with touch-sensitive controls and, perhaps most surprisingly, a computerized navigation system. Long before GPS or digital dashboards, the Seattleite 21 hinted at a world where drivers could input destinations and receive guided directions via an onboard computer, an idea that sounded like science fiction at the time. Even in an era overflowing with dream cars and outlandish prototypes, the Seattleite 21 stood out for its sheer ambition and modular madness. It wasn't just a car, it was a rolling hypothesis about everything the automobile could become if technological limits didn't apply. Though it never advanced beyond the model stage, it remains one of the most conceptually overloaded and gloriously weird vehicles Ford ever imagined. Number 12. 1964 Ford Aurora. In 1964, Ford decided to dream not just about how cars looked or how fast they went, but how people might actually live inside them. The result was the Ford Aurora, a concept car so ambitious, so strange, and so utterly dedicated to comfort that it felt more like a moving lounge than a vehicle. If most concept cars of the era were about power and speed, the Aurora was about leisure, convenience, and technological fantasy for the modern traveler. The exterior design of the Aurora was both elegant and excessive. With a long body and massive front fascia, it featured an astonishing 12 headlights, 6 for regular driving and 6 more that activated for high beam. This made it look more like an illuminated spacecraft than a road-bound automobile. Above, a futuristic polarizing glass roof ran the length of the car, allowing natural light to pour in while passengers could tint it for shade or privacy. But the real weirdness was inside. The Aurora's cabin was divided into 3 distinct zones: a driver's cockpit, a middle lounge area, and a rear children's compartment. The center of the car featured a fully functional kitchen, complete with a thermo-electric refrigerator, a double oven, and storage drawers for utensils and cookware. Ford didn't just imagine you eating in your car, they imagined you cooking in it. The dashboard was filled with analog dials and indicators, including one for a navigation system that used roll-fed maps, a primitive ancestor to GPS. There were push-button controls for everything from climate settings to entertainment, all wrapped in futuristic materials and chrome trim. Ford even suggested that the Aurora could include a child quieting feature, essentially an intercom with volume control for parents to communicate with, or silence, the rear passengers. And to top it all off, the rear seats could be converted into a sleeping area, turning the entire vehicle into a road trip hotel suite. The Aurora was a rolling experiment in excess and imagination. It wasn't designed for speed, it was designed for escape. In Ford's wild catalog of weird ideas, the Aurora remains one of the most lavish and unconventional concepts ever conceived. Number 13. 1966 Ford Ranger II. In 1966, Ford threw out the pickup truck playbook and handed the pencil to Sid Mead, the legendary futurist who would later design worlds for Blade Runner and Tron. The result was the Ford Ranger II, a concept so visually radical and functionally bizarre that it barely resembled anything that had ever carried a bed and tailgate before. This was not your average workhorse. It was a rolling vision of what pickups might look like if designed by science fiction authors rather than truck engineers. The Ranger II's most eye-catching feature was its forward hinged canopy roof, which replaced conventional doors entirely. Rather than opening a side door, the entire front section of the cabin lifted upward like a fighter jet's cockpit canopy. This theatrical entry system wasn't just for show. It was meant to suggest a cleaner, more integrated approach to getting in and out of a futuristic utility vehicle. But the strangeness didn't end there. The cab itself could expand backward, sliding along hidden rails to create extra space for 2 more passengers. With the push of a button, the truck transformed from a 3-seater into a 5-passenger crossover long before that term even existed. The bed partially retracted as the cabin expanded, creating a flexible interior-to-cargo ratio that previewed the idea of modular automotive architecture decades before it hit production lines. Visually, the Ranger 2 was clean and minimalist, with a flat nose, concealed lighting, and smooth, flared wheel arches. It avoided the chrome-laden styling of its era in favor of a more unified, almost monolithic appearance. Its proportions were deliberately low and wide, giving it a stance closer to a performance coupe than a truck. The Ranger 2 was never meant for dealerships, but it did make its way into auto shows and magazines, sparking conversations about what a futuristic truck could be. Instead of focusing on ruggedness, it emphasized adaptability, comfort, and cinematic flair. It was equal parts utility, vehicle, and space pod, and in the long line of weird Ford ideas, it remains one of the most delightfully impractical. Number 14. 1967 Ford Kamuda. In a world still dominated by gas-guzzling sedans and roaring V8 engines, the 1967 Ford Kamuda was a tiny, electric whisper of what the future might hold. Developed by Ford of Britain, the Kamuda was one of the automaker's earliest attempts to explore all-electric propulsion, not through futuristic concept renderings, but through a real, drivable vehicle. And what they came up with was both modest and remarkably weird. The Ford Kamuda was a microcar, built with the growing congestion of urban centers in mind. Its stubby proportions, narrow body, and upright glass house gave it the look of a shrunken breadbox on wheels. It featured seating for 4, technically a 2+2 layout, with the rear seats only suitable for children or exceptionally tolerant adults. The car was powered by 4 lead-acid batteries, which gave it a claimed range of approximately 37 miles at a steady 25 miles per hour. Top speed was limited to around 40 miles per hour, making it strictly a low-speed city vehicle. But the strangest part of the Kamuda wasn't just its looks or speed, it was the fact that it came from Ford at all. In the muscle car era, with the Mustang in full swing and the GT40 conquering Le Mans, Ford quietly experimented with this low-power, high-efficiency vehicle that ran without a single drop of gasoline. It was a vehicle built entirely for a new idea: clean, silent, compact transportation for the urban commuter. Design-wise, the Kamuda featured flat-body panels, narrow tires, and minimalist interiors. There was no flash, no fins, and certainly no racing stripes. It looked more like a shoebox on wheels than a car, charming to some, ridiculous to others. Only a few prototypes were built, and the Kamuda never reached production. But in hindsight, it was eerily ahead of its time. The idea of a city-focused electric vehicle may have seemed laughably strange in the late 1960s, but in today's urban landscapes, the Kamuda looks less like a novelty and more like a prophetic oddball. A weird car? Absolutely. But also, perhaps, a quiet pioneer. Number 15. 1970 Ford GT70. In 1970, while Ford was basking in the global glory of its Le Mans-conquering GT40, its British division was quietly cooking up a very different kind of performance machine, the GT70. Unlike its larger, race-bred sibling, the GT70 was envisioned as a nimble, lightweight rally car built to challenge European competitors, like the Lancia Stratos and the Porsche 911. But despite its thrilling premise and exotic proportions, the GT70 never got beyond a handful of prototypes. From a design standpoint, the GT70 was unlike anything else Ford was producing at the time. This was a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive sports car with sharp, wedge-shaped bodywork and pop-up headlights, features far more associated with Ferraris and Lamborghinis than anything bearing a blue oval. The sleek fiberglass body was wrapped around a tubular space-frame chassis, keeping weight to a minimum and performance potential high. The cockpit was tight and driver-focused, featuring a sparse dashboard, bucket seats, and a bare-bones interior, all tailored for rally performance rather than road comfort. Under the hood, rather, behind the seats, Ford tested both the 2.6-liter V6 from the Capri and a twin-cam 4-cylinder from Cosworth. The car showed promise in testing, especially on twisty terrain, where its low weight and balance shine. But despite its exotic look and focused engineering, the GT70 was plagued by problems. The chassis flexed too much under stress, and drivers complained about poor visibility and awkward ergonomics. More importantly, Ford's rally ambitions were rapidly shifting, and support for the GT70 dried up as the company redirected resources toward the Escort platform. In the end, only 6 GT70s were ever built, making it one of the rarest and strangest performance experiments in Ford's history. Today, it exists as a kind of mini supercar that never was, a rally-bred unicorn with styling that screamed Italy but roots firmly in England. Sleek, obscure, and utterly out of place in Ford's traditional lineup, the GT70 stands as one of the company's most eccentric engineering dead ends. A beautiful misfit, built in the shadows of giants. Number 16. 1971 Ford Pinto. In 1971, Ford entered the growing subcompact market with a car that was meant to be cheap, cheerful, and competitive with imports like the Volkswagen Beetle and Toyota Corolla. That car was the Ford Pinto, a small, rear-wheel drive two-door that arrived with big ambitions and an aggressively low price tag. But what started as a practical economy car quickly devolved into one of the most infamous product scandals in American automotive history. On the surface, the Pinto didn't look especially weird. Its styling was inoffensive, even cute by early 70s standards, with a stubby front end, flat rear, and modest chrome accents. It came in sedan, hatchback, and wagon variants, offering budget-conscious buyers something stylish and modern-looking. Underneath, however, lurked a fatal flaw that would cement the Pinto's place in the Hall of Automotive Infamy. The Pinto's fuel tank was mounted directly behind the rear axle, just inches from the rear bumper. In the event of a rear-end collision, the tank was prone to puncturing and leaking fuel, which could then ignite and cause catastrophic fires. Even worse, internal company documents revealed that Ford was aware of the defect, but decided not to make a design change, allegedly because the cost of a fix outweighed potential legal settlements. This cold cost-benefit analysis became a national scandal and led to investigations, lawsuits, and public outrage. Despite the controversy, the Pinto was a sales success, moving over 3 million units throughout the 70s. But the damage to its reputation was irreparable. The name Pinto became shorthand for corporate negligence, and the car was lampooned in media, law schools, and safety campaigns for decades to follow. What makes the Pinto so weird is not its appearance, but its legacy. It was a seemingly ordinary economy car that became the center of one of the most bizarre and damning stories in automotive history. In trying to build something simple and affordable, Ford accidentally created a case study in how not to balance engineering, ethics, and economics. A tragic tale wrapped in a compact shell. Number 17. 1976 Ford Corda. In 1976, Ford's Italian styling house Ghia unveiled a concept that looked like it had burst out of a comic book and into the real world. That car was the Ford Corrida, a fiery orange wedge-shaped sports coupe built on the humble underpinnings of the Ford Fiesta. But while the Fiesta was all about practicality and fuel economy, the Corda was about experimenting with angles, panels, and flair in the most unconventional way possible. The Corda's body was extremely low and sharply pointed, with a long, tapering hood that gave it the appearance of a miniature supercar. The front featured hidden headlights concealed beneath flush-fitting panels, which popped up when needed, a design feature usually reserved for exotic cars. From the rear, the car carried thick haunches and a louvered fastback deck, giving it a muscular, almost rally-inspired look despite its compact size. But the most bizarre feature by far was the Corda's two-piece gull-wing doors. These weren't typical gull wings that lifted as a single panel. Instead, each door was divided into two sections, folding upward and inward like the wings of a mechanical insect. This odd mechanism was not only theatrical, but also completely impractical. Imagine trying to open it in a tight parking space or low garage. Inside, the Corda had a minimalist cabin with sporty bucket seats, aircraft-style toggle switches, and a futuristic, squared-off steering wheel. The interior matched the car's extroverted exterior with bold shapes and colors, all hinting at speed and technology. Underneath, however, it retained its modest Fiesta roots, making it more showpiece than performance machine. The Corda never made it beyond the concept phase, but it left a vivid impression. It was a playful contradiction, a supercar-shaped toy with economy car DNA. Its exaggerated design, flashy paint, and peculiar doors placed it squarely in the realm of weird, proof that even a budget car could be reborn as a sci-fi sculpture on wheels. Number 18. 1976 Ford Prima. In the same year Ford unveiled the Corda, it also introduced something even stranger, the 1976 Ford Prima. Also designed by Ghia, the Prima took the compact Fiesta platform and stretched its versatility to near breaking point, resulting in one of the weirdest shape-shifting cars ever conceived. If the Corda was about sleek design and flair, the Prima was about morphing practicality into futuristic absurdity. At its core, the Prima was a modular concept vehicle designed to serve multiple purposes by allowing its entire rear section to be swapped out. It could be a two-seat pickup truck one day, a sports coupe the next, and even a fastback four-seater or compact wagon, all by changing external body modules. These panels could supposedly be removed and replaced in just a few hours, transforming the car's form and function depending on the driver's needs. The idea was bold and incredibly strange. The Prima's fixed front section featured a futuristic wedge profile, integrated bumpers, and smooth, flat surfaces that were in sharp contrast to the rounded economy cars of the day. The rest of the car's styling depended on what module was attached. With its pickup bed fitted, it resembled a miniature urban utility truck. With its fastback coupe shell, it looked like a sporty hatchback. Each transformation dramatically altered the car's silhouette and purpose. Inside, the cabin was simple but adaptable, echoing the same modular logic. Seats could be repositioned, storage areas reconfigured, and dashboard components upgraded depending on the intended use. Though it remained purely a concept, the Prima hinted at a future where a single car could replace several types of vehicles, an ambitious vision decades ahead of multi-role crossovers. Ultimately, the Prima was too complex and costly to ever become a production reality. But in terms of sheer weirdness, few cars can compete with a Fiesta-based transformer designed to be a pickup, a coupe, a family hauler, and a concept all rolled into one. It wasn't just a car, it was a shape-shifting automotive experiment. Number 19. 1979-1982 Ford Durango. Between 1979 and 1982, Ford quietly offered one of the strangest vehicles to ever wear a blue oval badge, even though Ford didn't actually build it. It was called the Ford Durango, not to be confused with Dodge's SUV of the same name, and it was a bizarre hybrid of coupe and pickup that looked like it belonged nowhere in particular. Developed not in-house, but by National Coach Works of Los Angeles, the Durango began life as a Ford Fairmont Futura coupe before being transformed into a car-based utility vehicle. The result was a two-door, two-seat coupe utility, essentially a miniature Ranchero built during a time when Ford had officially discontinued the Ranchero nameplate. The rear seat and trunk were eliminated entirely, replaced with a flat cargo bed made of fiberglass and a functional tailgate. Though the bed was relatively shallow and the truck's payload capacity modest, it was technically a pickup and sold through official Ford dealerships, albeit in extremely limited numbers. The styling was awkward but distinctive. The original Fairmont's slanted roofline and dual square headlamp front fascia remained, but the roof ended abruptly behind the front seats, with a new rear window and flatbed grafted in. The lines didn't quite flow, and the proportions were odd. Long nose, stubby tail, and a bed that looked like an afterthought. Yet, somehow, the Durango exuded a kind of offbeat charm, like a factory mistake someone decided to sell anyway. Under the hood, most Durangos came with modest six-cylinder engines, prioritizing fuel economy over muscle. Performance was average, and the build quality varied, but the vehicle served a niche: urban buyers who wanted the utility of a truck without the size or price tag. Only about 200 of these Franken trucks were ever produced, making the Durango one of the rarest and most bizarre Ford-adjacent vehicles ever sold. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't powerful, and it wasn't practical, but it was weird in all the right ways. A forgotten footnote in Ford's lineup, the Durango stands today as a testament to what happens when you mix necessity, creativity, and just a bit of desperation. Number 20. 1984 Ford RS 200. In 1984, Ford built a car so strange, so aggressive, and so unlike anything else it had ever produced that most people today still can't believe it wore a Ford badge. That car was the RS 200, a road-going rally monster designed not for mass-market consumers, but to satisfy the stringent homologation rules of the Group B rally era. With its mid-engine layout, composite bodywork, and razor-sharp handling, the RS 200 was essentially a race car, dressed up just enough to pass for street legal. From a design standpoint, the RS 200 was pure function wrapped in minimalist flair. Its fiberglass body was pinned by Ghia and manufactured by Reliant, the same company famous for the three-wheeled Robin. The car featured flush-fitting panels, bulging wheel arches, massive side vents, and a short, purposeful stance that made it look more like an exotic prototype than a Ford product. The front and rear clamshell body sections could lift completely off for easy servicing, revealing its motorsport DNA. Underneath that peculiar shell sat a mid-mounted, turbocharged 1.8-liter Cosworth engine, delivering up to 240 horsepower in street trim and well over 400 in race spec. Power was sent to all four wheels through a rally-bred drivetrain, giving the RS 200 incredible grip and cornering capability. It could launch from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds, an astonishing figure for the mid-1980s. But the RS 200's weirdness wasn't just about performance, it was about context. This was the same era when Ford's mainstream lineup consisted of Escorts, Tempos, and Crown Victorias. Dropping a mid-engine rally car into showrooms, even in tiny numbers, felt like an act of corporate schizophrenia. Only around 200 units were built to satisfy Group B regulations, and while it never found massive success on the rally stage, it earned a cult following for its absurd power-to-weight ratio and quirky looks. Today, the RS 200 is remembered as a glorious anomaly in Ford's history. It was loud, light, twitchy, and completely out of place, exactly what makes it one of the weirdest and most exhilarating cars Ford ever produced. Number 21. 1994 Ford Scorpio Mk2. In 1994, Ford of Europe unveiled the second-generation Scorpio, a car so visually peculiar that it became infamous before most people had even driven one. The Scorpio Mk2 was intended to be a bold new direction for Ford's executive-class sedan, a flagship for comfort, innovation, and modern styling. Instead, it ended up as one of the most widely ridiculed production car designs of the decade. The most immediately jarring element was the front end. The Scorpio featured a pair of large, heavily rounded, almost frog-like oval headlights, which gave the car an expression somewhere between sleepy and surprised. These were joined by a curving grille that merged indistinctly into the bumper, erasing any traditional cues of elegance or aggression. The design was meant to embody Ford's new organic styling language, but to most critics and customers, it looked more like a melted bar of soap. The bulbous theme continued along the sides, where bloated fenders and soft shoulder lines made the car appear unusually tall and saggy for its class. At the rear, the taillights were similarly over-rounded, wrapping around a trunk that seemed to droop under the car's own weight. From nearly every angle, the Scorpio's proportions and curves defied convention, and not in a flattering way. Underneath the odd skin, however, the Scorpio wasn't a bad car. It offered rear-wheel drive, advanced features like traction control, leather interiors, and multi-link rear suspension, features that were sophisticated for a mainstream European sedan in the mid-1990s. But none of that mattered. The styling was so polarizing that it alienated core buyers overnight, especially fleet managers and professionals who preferred discretion over design experiments. sales were dismal, and Ford quietly pulled the plug on the model without offering a direct replacement. In the years since, the Scorpio Mk2 has earned a kind of cult status, not for its performance or luxury, but for being so weird-looking that it became an accidental icon of design misfires. It may have driven like a proper sedan, but it looked like a design from another planet. Number 22. 1996 Ford Ka. In 1996, Ford threw a stylistic curveball at the city car segment with the introduction of the Ka, an ultra-compact hatchback that looked more like a squash bubble than a traditional automobile. Intended as an entry-level urban runabout for European markets, the Ka debuted Ford's new edge design philosophy, a bold visual language full of intersecting arcs, bulging surfaces, and sharp character lines. But on a car this small, the result was more toy-like than futuristic. The most defining characteristic of the original Ford Ka was its unusually rounded shape. With its high roofline, short overhangs, and bulbous fenders, the Ka looked almost cartoonish. Adding to the strangeness were the unpainted black plastic bumpers and wheel arches, which made it look perpetually unfinished or like a prototype that had accidentally gone to production. While these design choices were pitched as youthful and urban, many buyers were simply confused. Inside, the weirdness continued. The dashboard was made of molded plastic with minimalist features, and exposed metal surfaces were part of the car's visual identity rather than an oversight. With 2 doors, tight rear seats, and a tiny trunk, practicality was not its strongest suit, but style and maneuverability were. Under the hood, the Ka was powered by an outdated 1.3-liter Kent engine that had been in use since the 1960s. It was underpowered but reliable, making the Ka cheap to run and maintain. That reliability, paired with its ultra-compact footprint, made it surprisingly popular in crowded European cities, despite, or perhaps because of, its offbeat appearance. The Ka went on to sell well and spawn multiple generations, but the first one remains the weirdest by far. It was a design risk that turned into a quirky success, winning fans for its unapologetic oddness and city-friendly footprint. Few cars have ever embraced their weirdness so completely, and fewer still have managed to look like a rubber duck and still sell in the hundreds of thousands. Number 23. 1996 Ford Indigo. In 1996, Ford decided to throw practicality to the wind and showcase what it could build if form and function were borrowed directly from the racetrack. The result was the Ford Indigo, a concept roadster that looked less like a car you'd drive to the grocery store and more like something you'd launch off the starting grid at the Indianapolis 500. This was not a warmed-over sports car or a futuristic electric experiment. It was a raw, exposed, V12-powered statement piece that made no effort to blend in. The Indigo's design borrowed heavily from open-wheel race car. It featured exposed wheels, pushrod suspension visible beneath the body, and a tandem seat open cockpit that left both the driver and passenger fully exposed to the wind. There was no windshield, no doors, and certainly no roof. Getting in meant climbing over the side like a Formula One driver. It was equal parts thrilling and utterly impractical. Beneath the radical styling sat a custom-built V12 engine, essentially 2 Duratec V6s fused together, producing over 400 horsepower. The chassis was made from carbon fiber and aluminum honeycomb, giving it a rigid yet lightweight structure more commonly found in Le Mans prototypes than Ford concept cars. The 6-speed sequential gearbox, racing harnesses, and racing-derived electronics pushed the Indigo even further into motorsport territory. Despite its track day roots, the Indigo was always intended to be a street-legal concept. Ford built it to showcase its engineering capability, not to sell it. Yet it was so extreme that the mere idea of it sharing space with sedans and minivans on a dealership lot felt surreal. The Indigo was never put into production, and that was probably for the best. It lacked practical features, offered no protection from the elements, and had no clear purpose beyond thrilling crowds at auto shows. But in terms of design, purity, and audacity, it stood out as one of Ford's most bizarre and unforgettable concept cars. It was a race car pretending to be a concept, or maybe a concept pretending to be a race car. Either way, it was gloriously weird. Number 24. 1999 Ford O21C. In 1999, Ford handed the design reins not to a car designer, but to an industrial designer, Australian-born Mark Newson, best known for his futuristic furniture and household objects. The result was the Ford O21C, a four-seat city car that looked like a cross between a vintage lunchbox and a Japanese cartoon. Named after the vibrant Pantone color O21C in which it debuted, the car was a bold experiment in style, simplicity, and usability. The O21C was compact and smooth, with soft curves, round edges, and flush surfaces that made it look like it had been molded from plastic rather than assembled from panels. The design lacked any aggressive lines or mechanical complexity. Instead, it radiated friendliness. There were no grills, spoilers, or sharp creases, and every component from the mirrors to the door handles was pared down to its most essential geometric form. The car even sat on color-matched wheels, further emphasizing its toy-like charm. The weirdness didn't stop at its looks. The rear trunk pulled out like a drawer, similar to a filing cabinet, rather than lifting upward. The front seats could swivel 180 degrees to face the rear seats, effectively transforming the car into a mobile lounge. All lighting, headlights, taillights, and turn signals used electroluminescent strips, giving the car a surreal glow. Inside, the dashboard was minimalist and almost cartoonish in its execution, with rotary knobs and bright accents. Every aspect of the O21C was crafted with Mark Newson's signature design language, playful, modern, and clean. It didn't feel like a car from the future as imagined by engineers. It felt like the future as imagined by an artist. While it was never intended for production, the O21C served as a creative reset button for Ford. It proved that weird could be warm, fun, and approachable. In a world of edgy prototypes and macho SUVs, the O21C was like a breath of orange-scented air, strange, joyful, and completely unlike anything else on the road. 25. 1961 Ford Gyronaut X1. In the early 1960s, Ford's fascination with gyroscopic stability didn't stop at cars. Following the debut of the two-wheeled Ford Gyron concept in 1961, the company lent its backing to a project that was even more daring, the Ford Gyronaut X1. This wasn't a car at all. It was a streamlined, rocket-shaped motorcycle designed to shatter land speed records and stretch the limits of what a motorcycle could be. Built by custom car legends Bob Lepin and Alex Tremulous, the same visionary behind the Ford Gyron and the Tucker 48, the Gyronaut X1 was a fully enclosed, two-wheeled land missile. Its body was narrow, long, and low, stretching over 20 feet with a drag coefficient that made it look like a torpedo built for Bonneville's salt flats. What made it weird wasn't just the shape or the fact that it had two wheels. It was the stabilizing system that allowed it to stand up even while stationary. Borrowing from the earlier Gyron's gyroscope balancing ideas, the Gyronaut X1 was designed with retractable outrigger wheels and internal weight distribution mechanisms that allowed it to remain upright even at rest. Unlike most streamliners that needed external supports or cradles, the Gyronaut was meant to hold itself, an engineering marvel that bordered on science fiction. Power came from not one, but two Triumph engines, combined to drive the rear wheel with ferocious output. With a theoretical top speed approaching 400 miles per hour, the Gyronaut X1 was chasing history. In 1966, it officially became the world's fastest motorcycle, reaching just over 245 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. Unfortunately, the Gyronaut suffered a horrific crash in 1970 and was severely damaged, but it remains a legendary piece of speed history. It also stands as one of the weirdest things Ford ever put its name on, even tangentially. A motorcycle that didn't tip over, a body shaped like a missile, and a Ford logo on the fairing. It was insanity on two wheels, and a perfect symbol of 60s-era innovation without restraint.